American Nightmare. So, what did I think of Alan Wake's American Nightmare? I thought it was really good. I really did. But we'll talk about it from a mechanical standpoint, a story standpoint, and of course an overall standpoint, as we do with anything that we beat here on the channel. First and foremost, mechanically, it's very much like the first game, but the major difference is everything feels more polished, or at least feels less grindy, I guess. So the combat, I will say, feels more action oriented. Like, it's definitely like flashlight bang, flashlight bang, flashlight bang, right? It's definitely, and there's different weapons too, which there wasn't a whole, there was some in the first game, but in this one there was like combat shotgun and hunting rifle and carbine rifle and submachine gun and a nail gun, which we never used. But yeah, overall, mechanically, the flashlight took less time to break their armor. The flashlight also recharged a lot quicker. The combat, like the shooting, felt a lot cleaner. Like, even if I was off by a little bit, in a few cases that wasn't true, but even if I was off by a little bit, it would still be like, we'll just nudge the bullet in the right direction. Because I think they realized, maybe with this one in particular, that the combat, the obstacles are not necessarily the most important thing. It's the story. People want to hear about, what is Alan Wake doing? How are we fighting Mr. Scratch? What is he doing? What is he thinking? You know, and they really did, it feels like they really did focus on the story so much more than these like long segments of like running through darkness and getting attacked by 17 million things and running through darkness and driving around. They cut out a lot of that, what feels like filler content, essentially, in from the first game. Now, I will say, the first game definitely had more tension. It definitely felt more of a horror game than this did, which is probably why some people don't like it. This feels more like an action game with a horror story, and less like a horror game with a horror story. But I didn't mind it, because again, I like that the focus was on the story. I like the actor that does. Let me look up the actor's name so I can give him his props. I don't know if I can pronounce this name. It's Ika Vili is a Finnish actor. Anyways, we'll call him Mr. Wake. The actor for Mr. Wake did a fantastic job. Absolutely, especially with this one. Like, I think he did an amazing job in the main game, the first game. But this just showing that dichotomy of Alan Wake versus Mr. Scratch, and showing that he could play both of these characters and both of them were very believable, was such a good job. Like, that was so well done. But back to the mechanics. There wasn't a whole lot of other stuff mechanically. Like I said, there's the looping mechanic, which again, I don't think it wastes your time. It literally goes, okay, here's the main loop, here's the second loop, here's the third loop, right? It's doing the 3-act structure, which is how a lot of things are like filmed, and a lot of stories are written, which actually makes great sense given this game. Like, that's the thing too, is I think there's a lot of like little details like that that really set it apart too. Is, you know, if you've ever watched a film, there's usually a 3-part structure, right? You have the beginning, the rising action, and then the climax, right? You have the arc. And this kind of does that. And what's cool is that's also represented a lot in writing, which he's a writer, and like I said, in film, which is what we're eventually putting on the screen at the very end at the drive-in. So it's very cool for them to do all of that. Now, whether or not he's actually out of the darkness is a little unclear, but again, mechanically, I think they just cleaned up a lot of stuff, and I think it made it for a much cleaner experience, much more fun experience to just kind of go through while learning the story. So now that I keep bouncing into the story, let's actually talk about the story. So the story of American Nightmare is basically Alan Wake is stuck in the darkness. Mr. Scratch has locked him into this area that he's created a kind of like Night Springs episode esque thing, and Alan has to repeat it multiple times in order to get everything he needs to break that cycle. Now, what's interesting is Mr. Scratch is not just a representation of like all the toxic things that Alan Wake could be or could do, or maybe has done in some cases. He's also a representation of like power structures. He's a representation of like control structures and stuff like that, which is really interesting because you see him like as at the start, Alan is like behind the 8 ball, right? Like he's just so far behind Scratch. But you see as the loops go on, he starts to find that balance, which is repeated multiple times throughout the game. That it's all about finding. It's not about being like good, perfect good all thing. It's about finding that balance, right? And once he finds that balance, you notice that like Scratch loses that power and gets more and more desperate. So we watch him from being this like laughing sociopath to being like, hold on now, I'm the one who set the trap. Why is it not working? And he's also a great representation of hubris, right? Because he was just like, well, you're stuck in my trap. Problem solved, right? And Alan basically takes advantage of that by making him pay for his hubris. And I think that's just an interesting thing. Like I said, there's a lot of really good writing, I think, in here as well. That's just story-wise, this was really good. I think it's a great accent to the first game. It gives us a little bit more of an extension of the story. Again, I'm not completely sure that if he's out of the darkness, it's not obvious. They said that they connect after a long time, far from Night Springs, but he also mentioned early on that whenever you use film or writing or radio or whatever, like that allows you to pierce the veil for a little bit, but it's never permanent. So I'm still not convinced that he's out of the darkness. I think it's just he's got a moment of reprieve where he's allowed to spend time with Alice before the darkness takes him back. That's my guess. Again, we'll get into Alan Wake 2 and we'll see how that's all handled. But yeah. Story-wise, I think this was really cool. I don't mind the looping mechanic. I think it actually works well for the story because it works on the idea that Alan, in order to survive, has to be persistent. He has to keep beating back that voice of Mr. Scratch, which is that internal voice to, give up, don't stop fighting, all those voices that you get when you've experienced, some sort of trauma or something like that. You get these voices, and Mr. Scratch was a perfect example of those in physical form, and Alan's persistence every single loop to be like, okay, we can do it better. We can do it better. We can do it better, right? It also plays into that writer mindset of, if you don't succeed at first, try again, try again, try again. Your first 3 books may never sell, but you get to that 4th book, bam, you got your bestseller, right? Now, for him, it was a little bit different, but it's interesting that there's a lot of that writing that I think really shines in American Nightmare, right? But story-wise, yeah, I really like this. I like Mr. Scratch. I like the looping mechanic as a vehicle for persistence and eventually finding that balance. So overall, if it's not completely obvious, I really enjoyed this. And I do recommend it. This standalone DLC just completely blew me away. Because I'll be honest, coming out of the first game, I was a little worried. I wasn't a huge fan of the action parts, the survival part of the survival horror, if you will, of the first game. I didn't like how the flashlight gun mechanic worked. It just felt tedious and repetitive and fillery. But here, because of the swiftness of the combat, yeah, they throw 6 guys at you, but then you'd be like, flashlight, 4 guys broken, bang, 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 and, you know, they'd be down in no time. So even when you're overwhelmed, it was very easy to take them out. But I think by rebalancing that and focusing on the story, that made this one so much better. So maybe this is the hottest take I've ever had on the channel, but I like American Nightmare more than I liked Alan Wake 1. I love the story of Alan Wake 1, but I enjoyed American Nightmare start to finish, both mechanically and story-wise. So it gets a recommend from me. I think you should check it out. Of course, make your own what is it called? Opinions on the game. I'd love to hear them. You know, if you're watching this over on YouTube, down in the comments, leave me a comment. What did you think? Why do you like or dislike American Nightmare? Have you played American Nightmare? Are you going to play American Nightmare? All that stuff. But I do recommend it. Definitely check it out if you've played Alan Wake 1. Otherwise, the story might not make as much sense if you haven't played Alan Wake 1, but I think you still kind of get it, because they do a little bit of a recap, in American Nightmare. So check it out, and thank you so much for watching, and I appreciate you guys checking out these reviews. There's more to come, and we'll be starting Alan Wake 2 very, very soon. So I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.